The key turned in the lock with a quiet, metallic sigh. It was 1:17 a.m. Liam felt the bone-deep weariness of a transatlantic flight settle into his shoulders as he pushed the heavy oak door open. The apartment was dark, silent. A familiar, comforting silence, he thought. The kind of quiet that meant Chloe was already asleep, a soft lump under the duvet in their shared bedroom. He'd texted her from the tarmac at JFK, a simple landed, "See you soon," and had received no reply, which wasn't unusual. She often slept through his late arrivals, her phone on silent on the nightstand. He set his carry-on bag down, the gentle thud swallowed by the plush runner in the hallway. He shrugged off his coat, the scent of recycled airplane air clinging to the fabric, and moved toward the kitchen, his body craving a simple glass of cold water. He flicked on the under-cabinet lights, and the kitchen bloomed in a soft, golden glow. That's when he saw them. 2 wine glasses stood on the polished granite of the island counter. They were side by side, too close to be a simple case of one person using 2 glasses. One had a faint, smudged crescent of lipstick on the rim, Chloe's preferred shade of deep crimson. The other was clean. Beside them, an empty bottle of Burlo, a 2016 vintage he'd been saving for their anniversary. A wave of confusion, cold and sharp, cut through his fatigue. Chloe rarely drank red wine alone, and never this particular bottle. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a second before touching the bowl of the first glass, the one without the lipstick. It was still warm, not hot, not freshly washed, but with the faint, residual warmth of a hand that had been holding it only a short time ago. He touched the other, the same. A knot of ice formed in his stomach, a stark contrast to the warmth under his fingertips. He looked around the immaculate space. Everything was in its place. The mail was stacked neatly. The throw pillows on the living room sofa were perfectly plumped. There were no overt signs of disruption, no evidence of a party. There was only this quiet, intimate tableau. 2 glasses, an empty bottle of special wine, and a warmth that screamed of recent presence. He thought they were so clever. He thought they had pulled it off. What they didn't know was that in his briefcase, nestled between architectural blueprints for a multi-billion-dollar sustainable community project, was a leather folio containing a truth that would systematically dismantle their entire world. Within 3 weeks, the lives they knew, the status they cherished, and the fortune they flaunted would be nothing but a memory. I know what you're thinking, and you're right. This is a story about betrayal, but it's also a story about foundations, the ones we build our lives on, and how easily they can crumble when they're built on lies. If you've ever felt underestimated or unseen, stick around. This one's for you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. The warmth of the glasses was a physical manifestation of the betrayal. It was an insult. It suggested they were so confident, so brazen, that they hadn't even bothered to cover their tracks. They had likely finished their wine and departed only moments before his taxi pulled up to the curb. He pictured the scene, the shared laughter, the clinking of glasses, the intimate conversation under the soft lights he himself had installed. The man, and he knew, with a certainty that was absolute and chilling, that it was a man, had probably kissed Chloe goodbye at the door he had just walked through. He walked silently through the apartment. The living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, felt alien. The minimalist furniture, the carefully chosen art, it all felt like a stage set for a play in which he was no longer a principal actor. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom. Chloe was there, just as he'd imagined, a still form under the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets. Her breathing was deep and even, the practiced rhythm of feigned sleep. He could see the faint outline of her phone on the nightstand, screen down. She hadn't slept through his text. She had ignored it. She had known he was on his way. A surge of hot, white anger flashed through him, so intense it made him dizzy. He wanted to storm in, to rip the covers back, to confront her, to see the panic and fear in her eyes. But that wasn't his way. Patience, strategy. He had built his entire career on those 2 principles. You don't win by reacting. You win by planning. You win by understanding the complete structure of the problem before you make a single move. And this was a structural problem. The entire foundation of his life with Chloe was compromised. He backed away from the door, his movements as silent as a predator's. He returned to the kitchen and looked at the wine glasses again. He picked up the bottle, turning it in his hands. A gift from a client after the successful completion of the Helios Tower project, a building that had won him the prestigious Pritzker Architecture Prize, a fact he had kept deliberately private. To Chloe and her family, he was just Liam, a moderately successful architect who worked for a small, boutique firm. They had no idea that Viridian Structures was his firm, that it was a global leader in sustainable design, or that his personal net worth was in the 9 figures. He had wanted to be loved for who he was, not for what he had. He had wanted to build a life on a foundation of genuine connection, not one propped up by the scaffolding of wealth. It was a foolish, romantic notion, and the warmth from these glasses was the price of his naivety. He calmly took out his phone, not to text or to call, but to take a picture. The 2 glasses, the empty bottle, the lipstick stain. A high-resolution, time-stamped photograph. Evidence. The first brick in a new structure he was about to design. Not a building of steel and glass, but a meticulous, inescapable edifice of consequences. He then walked to his home office, a small room that Chloe's family often joked was where he played with his little drawings. He unlocked his briefcase and pulled out the leather folio. He placed it on his desk, its worn surface cool and reassuring beneath his hand. Inside was the ammunition. Tonight, the war had begun without his consent, but he would be the one to end it. On his terms. He sat down in his chair, the city lights twinkling like a million unfeeling eyes, and began to plan. The rage was still there, a molten core deep inside him, but it was now being forged into something cold, hard, and unbreakable. Resolve. The humiliation had been a slow, creeping poison. It began the first time he met her family. Richard Sterling, Chloe's father, was a man carved from old money and casual disdain. He ran a commercial real estate empire built by his grandfather, a business that specialized in erecting bland, soulless office parks and luxury condos that prized profit far above aesthetics or community. He had shaken Liam's hand with a grip that was less a welcome and more an assessment of weakness, his eyes sweeping over Liam's simple but well-tailored suit with a dismissive flicker. "So, you're an architect," Richard had said, his tone suggesting it was a quaint, if not particularly masculine, profession. The setting was the family's sprawling estate in Greenwich, a faux Tudor mansion filled with heavy, dark furniture and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. "Chloe tells me you work for a sustainable firm. Very noble. Doesn't sound particularly profitable, but noble." Liam had simply smiled. "We do all right. We believe you can build a better world and still turn a profit." Richard had chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. A lovely sentiment for a young man. The real world, however, runs on concrete and leverage, not sentiment. He had then turned his back on Liam, effectively ending the conversation and dismissing him as an irrelevant footnote in the evening. Chloe had squeezed his arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt more like an apology for her father's behavior. "Don't mind him," she whispered. "He's from a different generation," but she never defended him. She never stood up to her father and said, "Dad, that was rude," or "You don't know what you're talking about." She was a silent enabler, her inaction a quiet endorsement of her family's judgment. The dinner that night was an exercise in subtle condescension. Eleanor, Chloe's mother, a woman whose face was a smooth, unmoving mask of cosmetic procedures, inquired about his family background. When Liam explained his father was a history professor and his mother a librarian, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How wonderful," she'd said. "A family of academics. It must be so quiet." The implication was clear, a world away from their universe of galas, yachts, and board meetings. Julian, Chloe's younger brother, was perhaps the most overtly insulting. A smug, preening man who held a vague VP of Acquisitions title at his father's company. He treated Liam with the kind of amused contempt one might reserve for a talking dog. Sustainable architecture. Julian mused over dessert, swirling his brandy. Is that the stuff with grass on the roof? Seems like a lot of trouble when you can just crank the AC, but I guess it keeps you busy. Liam endured it all with a preternatural calm. He answered their questions politely. He met their condescending gazes with a steady, unreadable stare. He knew what they were doing. They were testing him, trying to find his breaking point to see if he was worthy of entering their orbit. They were measuring him by their own warped yardstick of status and wealth, and finding him wanting. The dramatic irony was a bitter pill. He could have bought Richard's entire company with a fraction of his personal fortune. The little drawings in his office were for projects that would reshape city skylines and win international acclaim, while Julian was celebrating the acquisition of a parcel of land for another suburban strip mall. But he stayed quiet. He held on to his secret for Chloe's sake. He had seen a spark in her, a warmth and kindness that seemed separate from her family's cold ambition. He believed that with him, she could be the person she was when they were alone, funny, adventurous, and seemingly unimpressed by the gilded cage she was born into. He thought his love could be the foundation for her to build a new identity away from their influence. Now, sitting in his office at 2 a.m., the memory of that first dinner felt like a prophecy. He had been so focused on building a future with Chloe that he had failed to properly analyze the weakness in her own foundation. She was not a separate entity from her family. She was an extension of them. Her values were their values, buried under a thin veneer of rebellion that he had mistaken for genuine character. The man with the warm wine glass was likely someone they approved of, someone with the right last name, the right portfolio, the right pedigree, as Richard would say. He opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his face in the dark. He pulled up the photo of the wine glasses. He saved it to a secure, encrypted folder. Then he opened another file, a complex spreadsheet detailing the financial architecture of Sterling Holdings, Richard's company. For months, he had been studying it, not out of malice, but initially out of due diligence. He needed to understand the world his fiancée came from. What he had found was alarming. Richard, for all his bluster about concrete and leverage, was a reckless gambler. The company was dangerously over-leveraged, propped up by a series of high-interest loans from a consortium of private equity firms, all secured to finance a single, massive vanity project, the Sterling Grand, a monstrous 80-story luxury tower in the heart of the city. Liam zoomed in on the list of creditors. He knew their names. He had done business with them before. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The rage was gone, replaced by a chillingly clear sense of purpose. He was an architect, after all, and he was about to design their ruin. The blueprints were already in his head. Every load-bearing wall of their arrogance, every hollow pillar of their pride. He would bring it all down, piece by piece, until nothing was left but the rubble of their own making. And he would do it without ever raising his voice. The following week was a masterclass in deception, both his and hers. Chloe behaved as if nothing had happened. She was effusively affectionate, kissing him deeply when he woke up the morning after his arrival, asking about his trip to London, feigning wifely concern over his jet lag. It was a flawless performance. The perfect, loving fiancée. "I missed you so much," she said, her head on his chest. "The apartment feels so empty when you're gone." Liam played his part. He held her, smiled, and spoke of the meetings, omitting the part where he had finalized the funding for the Henderson Community Center, a pro bono project he was personally financing in a low-income neighborhood. It was productive, he said, his voice even. London is always a bit of a grind. He watched her as she moved about their home. This woman he thought he knew. He saw the subtle tells he'd been blind to before. The way her eyes would dart to her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. The slight, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw when he would ask a simple question about her day. She mentioned having had a quiet night while he was away, just caught up on some reading and went to bed early. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost admirable. Meanwhile, Liam's days were a carefully constructed duality. To Chloe, he was going to his small office, working on a new library design for a small town upstate. In reality, he was in a sleek, glass-walled conference room in the financial district, sitting across from Isabella Rossi, A woman known in legal circles as the shark in the Chanel suit, she was his lead counsel, a woman whose mind was as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. The debt structure of Sterling Holdings is, to put it mildly, a house of cards, Isabella said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a tablet, displaying a complex flowchart. Richard Sterling leveraged everything against the completion of the grant. The project is over budget and behind schedule. The primary lender, a private equity group called Apex Capital, is getting nervous. Their patience is finite. Liam leaned forward, his hands clasped on the polished table. An Apex Capital? Do we have an in? Isabella's lips curved into a faint, predatory smile. Apex is a subsidiary of a much larger global fund, a fund that your firm, Viridian, has a very, very healthy relationship with. I took the liberty of speaking with Mr. Du Bois in their Paris office this morning. He was receptive. He finds Richard Sterling's business practices distasteful and his project an environmental eyesore. This was the core of Liam's strategy. He wouldn't use his own money directly. That would be too crude, too obvious. Instead, he would use his influence, his network, and the immense goodwill his firm had generated by being the most respected and ethically minded player in the game. He was a builder, and he was using the tools of his trade, leverage, relationships, and structural analysis to orchestrate a controlled demolition. They're willing to sell the debt portfolio? Liam asked, his voice low. For the right price, and to the right buyer, Isabella confirmed. They want out before Sterling defaults, which my analysts predict will happen in the next fiscal quarter. If a discrete, well-capitalized entity were to, say, acquire that debt, they would effectively become Richard Sterling's new boss. Liam nodded slowly. And we have such an entity, he gestured to the leather folio he'd brought with him. The holding companies are in place, fully funded and anonymous. It will take a few days to finalize the paperwork, Isabella said, her eyes gleaming with professional admiration. It's a beautiful play, Liam. Clean, surgical. By the time he realizes what's happened, you'll be holding the deed to his entire kingdom. It's not his kingdom I want, Liam said, his gaze distant. It's accountability. That Friday, Chloe announced that her family was expecting them for dinner. Just a casual get-together, she said, her voice bright and breezy. Daddy wants to hear all about your trip. The dread that once accompanied these invitations was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anticipation. This was an opportunity, another chance to gather data, to observe the subjects in their natural habitat before the ecosystem was irrevocably altered. He agreed without hesitation. The dinner was, as always, held at the Greenwich estate. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-satisfaction. Richard was in a boisterous mood, pouring vintage scotch and holding court in his cavernous, wood-paneled study. Julian just closed a magnificent deal, Richard announced, clapping his son on the back. We've acquired the last parcel needed for the new waterfront development. Prime real estate. We'll be breaking ground in 6 months. It was nothing, Dad, Julian said, though his chest was puffed out with pride. He glanced at Liam. Just a bit of good old-fashioned negotiation. You know, the kind that actually makes money. Liam offered a small, polite smile. Congratulations. He knew about the waterfront deal. He also knew that the land was environmentally sensitive and that Sterling Holdings had used a series of political loopholes and backroom deals to get the zoning permits approved, a fact that was about to be leaked to a very persistent investigative reporter of the New York Times. Later, at the dinner table, Eleanor turned her attention to him. Chloe tells us you're designing a library, Liam. How sweet. Are there many of those still being built? I thought everyone just used their little gadgets now. There's still a place for public spaces, Eleanor, Liam replied calmly. A place for community. Community? Richard snorted into his wine glass. That word again. You can't collateralize community, my boy. Remember that. He then launched into a long, rambling monologue about the Sterling Grand, his voice filled with hubris. It will be my legacy, the tallest, most luxurious building in the city. A testament to ambition. That's the name of the game, Liam. Ambition. You have to think big. You have to be willing to take risks. Liam listened, his expression impassive. He let the insults, the condescension, the sheer, blind arrogance wash over him. He met Chloe's eyes across the table. She was smiling, basking in her father's power, her head tilted in admiration. There was no flicker of shame, no hint of apology in her gaze. In that moment, he saw her with absolute, heartbreaking clarity. She wasn't just enabling them. She was one of them. The warmth she had shown him was not love, but a performance for a role she was no longer interested in playing. He discreetly touched the corner of the leather folio, which he had insisted on bringing into the house in his briefcase. It felt like a grounding object, a touchstone of the reality that was coming for them. They saw him as a small man, building small things. They were about to learn that he was the architect of something far grander and more terrible than they could ever imagine. The countdown had begun. The 2 weeks that followed were a quiet, escalating storm. On the surface, life was placid. Liam and Chloe went through the motions of a happy couple planning their future. They discussed wedding venues, tasted cakes, and debated invitation fonts. Chloe seemed to be in a particularly good mood, a lightness in her step that Liam now understood was relief. She believed she was getting away with it. She thought she had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of her affair and was coasting toward the safe harbor of her marriage to a stable, predictable, and easily manageable man. But beneath the calm surface, the tectonic plates of their world were shifting violently. Liam's days were a whirlwind of encrypted emails, secure video calls, and discreet meetings. The acquisition of Sterling Holdings debt was executed with silent, surgical precision. A newly formed, untraceable entity named North Star Asset Management was now the name on Richard Sterling's loan agreements. The ink was barely dry, and Richard had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had just turned to quicksand. Liam was now, for all intents and purposes, his banker. At the same time, the other pieces Liam had set in motion began to fall into place. An anonymous tip, complete with detailed environmental impact reports and leaked internal memos, landed on the desk of the New York Times reporter. The story that emerged was a bombshell. Sterling Holdings' waterfront project threatens protected wetlands, bypasses environmental laws. The article detailed the backroom deals and political favors, painting Richard not as a savvy businessman, but as a corrupt predator destroying a natural habitat for profit. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Environmental groups protested. City council members who had supported the project began to backpedal furiously. Julian's magnificent deal was now a toxic asset, a public relations nightmare. Liam watched the fallout from a distance, a silent observer. He saw the news report on a television in an airport lounge while waiting for a flight to Chicago to oversee the final stages of a new pediatric hospital his firm had designed. He saw Richard Sterling, his face a mask of rage, pushing past a throng of reporters, shouting no comment. It was the first crack in the facade. Chloe called him, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's a nightmare, Liam. That reporter is just out to get my father. It's all lies, a smear campaign by our competitors. I'm sure we'll all blow over," Liam said, his voice a calm, reassuring balm. These things always do. He was providing the comfort her lover, Marcus Thorne, apparently could not. Liam had done his homework. Marcus was a hedge fund manager with a flashy lifestyle, a portfolio built on high-risk, short-term gains, and a reputation for being ruthless. He was exactly the kind of man Richard would approve of. He was also, as Liam's private investigator had discovered, heavily invested in one of Richard's competitors, the very company Chloe was now accusing of a smear campaign. The irony was exquisite. The pressure mounted. With the waterfront project stalled indefinitely and his company's reputation in tatters, Richard's other creditors began to get nervous. The consortium of smaller banks that held the secondary debt on the Sterling Grand started making inquiries. They wanted assurances. They wanted proof of liquidity. Richard, desperate to project an aura of invincibility, doubled down. He hosted a lavish gala to celebrate the topping off of the Sterling Grand, a ceremony marking the placement of the final steel beam. It was a desperate act of theater, an attempt to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that everything was fine. He and Chloe, of course, were expected to attend. It was the perfect stage for the next act. Liam stood in their bedroom, adjusting his black tie in the mirror. Chloe emerged from her walk-in closet, a vision in a shimmering silver gown. She looked beautiful, and for a fleeting moment, a pang of the old affection, of what he had thought they had, echoed in his chest. It was a ghost limb, a phantom pain from a part of him that was already amputated. "How do I look?" she asked, striking a pose. "Incredible," he said, and he meant it. She was incredible, an incredible actress, an incredible stranger. At the gala, held in a sprawling, half-finished lobby at the base of the tower, the mood was one of forced gaiety. Champagne flowed, a string quartet played Vivaldi, but an undercurrent of desperation was palpable. Richard was working the room, his smile too wide, his laughter too loud. He grabbed Liam by the elbow, his grip surprisingly strong. "See, my boy," he said, gesturing expansively at the cavernous space. "This is what ambition looks like. Concrete, steel, a monument. They can write their nasty little articles, but they can't stop this. This is real." Liam looked up at the exposed girders and dangling cables, at the raw concrete floors. "It's certainly big, Richard," he said quietly. Later in the evening, Julian, his face flushed with champagne, cornered him by the bar. "So, I hear your little library project got approved," he slurred, a sneer playing on his lips. "Must be nice, playing in your little sandbox while the rest of us are out here building empires." Liam simply took a sip of his water. "Every building starts with a foundation, Julian," he said, his voice soft but clear. "If the foundation is bad, the size of the empire doesn't matter. It will fall." Julian just laughed, oblivious to the prophecy. As the evening wound down, Liam found himself standing near a quiet alcove, observing the crowd. He saw Chloe across the room, talking to a handsome, slick-haired man in a ridiculously expensive-looking watch. The man laughed and put a familiar hand on the small of Chloe's back. She leaned into the touch. It was Marcus Thorne, the man from the wine glasses. He watched them for a long moment, a clinical detachment settling over him. There was no anger anymore, only a profound, weary certainty. He reached into his jacket pocket, and his fingers brushed against the smooth, cool surface of his phone. On it was a single, prepared email. The recipient was Chloe. The subject line was a family meeting. The body of the email was simple. "I have something important to discuss with you and your family regarding our future. It concerns the Sterling Grant. Please arrange for us to meet at your father's study. Sunday at 3 p.m. It is urgent." He watched Chloe laugh again at something Marcus said. He took a slow breath, and he hit send. The message was delivered. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. The air in Richard Sterling's study was thick with the scent of old leather, wood polish, and arrogance. It was a room designed to intimidate, lined with leather-bound books that had never been read and dominated by a mahogany desk the size of a small car. On the wall behind the desk hung a massive, oil-painted portrait of Richard's grandfather, a man with a severe face and cold, unforgiving eyes. It was Sunday, just before 3 p.m. Richard sat behind the desk, steepled fingers beneath his chin, radiating impatience. Eleanor was perched on a love seat, her posture ramrod straight, a look of vague annoyance on her face as if this meeting was an inconvenient interruption to her afternoon. Julian stood by the fireplace, restlessly checking his phone, the picture of bored entitlement. Chloe sat next to her mother, her expression a careful mixture of support for Liam and deference to her family. She had asked him what this was about, and he had simply said, "It's better if we discuss it all together." Liam stood in the center of the room, calm and still. He held the worn leather folio in his hands. It was the only object he had brought with him. "All right, Liam," Richard began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You said this was urgent. We're all very busy people. What is it? Has your little firm gone under? Do you need a loan to tide you over until the wedding?" Julian snickered. "Maybe you want a job, Dad. We could probably use someone to fetch coffee." Liam ignored them. His gaze was fixed on Chloe. "Before we discuss business," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the hushed room, "we need to discuss something personal." He looked at the two wine glasses in his mind's eye. Chloe, I got back from my trip just after 1 in the morning. I was tired, but I remember it clearly. You know what I found? A flicker of something. Fear, perhaps, crossed Chloe's face. She shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. I don't know what you're talking about, Liam. I was asleep. You were pretending to be asleep. Liam corrected her gently. On the kitchen counter were 2 wine glasses and a bottle of the Barolo I was saving for our anniversary. The glasses, he paused, letting the word hang in the air, were still warm. The color drained from Chloe's face. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of theatrical shock. Richard's eyes narrowed. Julian stopped looking at his phone. This is an outrageous accusation, Richard boomed, rising slightly from his chair. You come into my home and insult my daughter? I'm not insulting her, Liam said, his voice still level. I'm stating a fact. There was someone in our apartment. I have the time-stamped photos of the glasses. I also have the security log from our building, which shows a guest, Mr. Marcus Thorne, signing in at 9:15 p.m. and signing out at 1:08 a.m. My taxi pulled up at 1:14 a.m. It was a close call. You were careless. He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes holding no anger, only a deep, profound disappointment. All you had to do was tell me the truth. All you had to do was be honest. But you chose to lie. You chose to stand here with your family and pretend. Chloe crumpled. The facade shattered, and she began to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. Liam, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, he said softly. I understand perfectly. Which brings me to the business portion of this meeting. He turned his attention to Richard, who was now standing, his face purple with rage. How dare you? This meeting is over. Get out of my house. I don't think so, Liam said. He walked over to the massive desk and placed the leather folio on its polished surface. He did not open it. He said the real world runs on concrete and leverage. You were half right. It runs on leverage. And right now, I am the man who holds all of it. Richard stared at him, bewildered. What in God's name are you babbling about? Let's talk about ambition, Liam said, his voice taking on a new, harder edge. He began to pace slowly, his footsteps unnervingly loud on the antique rug. You call my work noble, but not profitable. You dismiss my firm as boutique, my little drawings, as Julian so charmingly put it. He stopped and looked at each of them in turn. My firm, Viridian Structures, is not a boutique firm. It is one of the largest and most profitable architectural and development firms in the world, with a portfolio valued at over $50 billion. I didn't work for it. I founded it. I own it. A stunned silence filled the room. Eleanor looked as if she'd been slapped. Julian's mouth hung, slightly open. Richard stared at him, his brain clearly struggling to process the information. That's impossible, Richard stammered. Viridian is a giant. It's run by some reclusive genius. No one knows who he is. They do now, Liam said simply. I kept my identity private because I wanted a life that wasn't defined by my wealth. I wanted something real. I mistakenly thought I could build that with your daughter. He gestured to the folio. Now, let's talk about the sterling grand. Your legacy. Your monument to ambition. It's also a monument to debt. A debt so large and so precarious that your primary lender, Apex Capital, was desperate to offload it before you defaulted. He finally opened the folio. He slid a single sheaf of papers across the desk toward Richard. As of 3 days ago, a holding company under my control, North Star Asset Management, acquired 100% of your outstanding debt on that project. Which means, Richard, that I am your bank. And you are in default of your loan covenants. The bad press from the waterfront project, the cost overruns, you violated the terms. Technically, I own your building. Richard stared at the papers, his hands trembling as he reached for them. He read the first page, then the second. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, grayish color. He looked up at Liam, his eyes wide with a dawning, abject horror. The bluster, the arrogance, the condescending superiority, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a king who has just been checkmated. You can't, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. I can, Liam said. And I have. He looked around the room, at the crumbling dynasty. Eleanor was staring at him now, not with annoyance, but with a horrifying, calculating awe. Julian looked like a frightened child. And Chloe. Chloe was looking at him, as if for the first time, a dawning understanding in her tear-filled eyes of the sheer scale of the man she had betrayed. "You underestimated me," Liam said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, which was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "All of you. You judged me by my suit, by my quiet nature, by the fact that I didn't brag about my accomplishments. You assumed my humility was weakness. You assumed my patience was a lack of ambition." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You built your world on a foundation of arrogance and scorn. And now, your world is forfeit. This meeting is over." The immediate aftermath was a symphony of chaos played in a soundproof room. Richard Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who had commanded boardrooms and bullied politicians, sank into his oversized leather chair. The papers from the folio lay scattered on his desk, looking as innocuous and as deadly as a pile of ashes. His face was slack, his eyes unfocused. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own ghost. The architect of a soulless empire had just been foreclosed on by the architect of a better world. Eleanor was the first to find her voice, though it was a strained, unrecognizable version of her usual imperious tone. "Liam," she began, standing up and taking a hesitant step toward him. The calculation in her eyes was chilling. The gears were turning, reevaluating, recalibrating. He was no longer the charity case fiancé. He was a power player, a king in his own right, and she was a courtier desperate to remain in the palace. "There has been a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. Richard can be boisterous, a bit old-fashioned, but his heart is in the right place." Liam turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "His heart, Eleanor? Or his wallet? You weren't concerned about his heart when he was belittling me. You were only concerned that your daughter was marrying beneath her station. Your concern now is that she has fumbled the winning lottery ticket." The truth of the statement, so baldly spoken, made Eleanor flinch as if struck. Julian, who had been frozen by the fireplace, finally snapped out of his stupor. But his reaction wasn't anger. It was a pathetic, fawning panic. "Liam, man, I was just joking around. You know, guys busting each other's chops. I always respected your work, seriously. That whole sustainability thing is brilliant. Way ahead of its time." He was practically babbling, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to rewrite months of smug condescension. "If you need a good VP of acquisitions for your company. I mean, I have a lot of experience." Liam gave him a look of such profound pity that Julian's words died in his throat. "The position of coffee fetcher has been filled," he said, the quiet remark landing with the force of a physical blow. Then there was Chloe. She rose from the love seat, her beautiful face streaked with tears, her silver gown now looking like a cheap costume. She approached him slowly, her hands outstretched as if to touch him. "Liam, please," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. I love you. I was scared. I was confused. Marcus, he meant nothing. It was a moment of weakness. Don't let this ruin us. We can fix this. I can fix this." It was the plea he had expected, the one he had prepared for. He looked at her, the woman he had been ready to spend his life with, and felt a vast, empty sadness. He saw it all now. Her love was for the comfortable, manageable version of him she had created in her mind. The real him, the man who held this much power, who could move with this much strategic silence, was a stranger to her. And he terrified her. Her plea wasn't to get him back. It was to get his world back. "You don't love me, Chloe," he said, his voice gentle but firm, the finality of it echoing in the opulent room. "You love the idea of me. You love that I was safe. And when you got bored, you sought excitement elsewhere. Then, when my safety was revealed to be a different kind of power, a power that could benefit you, you decided you loved me again. That isn't love. It's opportunism. The same opportunism that drives your father, your mother, your brother. It's the family business. He stepped back, away from her outstretched hands. The engagement is over. I'll have your things from the apartment sent here tomorrow. He turned to Richard, who still sat, broken, behind his desk. As for the Sterling Grand, Liam said, his voice now crisp and professional. My team will be in touch on Monday morning. We will be restructuring the project from the ground up. The top 20 floors, the ostentatious penthouses, will be eliminated. They will be replaced with affordable housing units, subsidized by the profits from the commercial space below. The building will be retrofitted for environmental sustainability, complete with a green roof and a gray water recycling system. It will no longer be a monument to your ego, Richard. It will be a functioning, contributing part of the city. A place for community. He used Richard's most hated word like a scalpel. He saw the flicker of comprehension and fresh horror in the man's eyes. Not only had he lost his company, he was going to be forced to watch his legacy be rewritten into everything he despised. Liam turned and walked toward the door, the leather folio tucked under his arm. No one tried to stop him. He paused at the threshold and looked back one last time at the tableau of their ruin. The fallen king, the scheming queen, the sniveling prince, and the weeping princess. A fairytale in reverse. I wish you all the best, he said, and the most devastating part was that he almost meant it. He didn't wish them ill. He simply wished for them to face the consequences of their own choices. He closed the heavy door behind him, the click of the latch echoing like a final, damning judgment. The storm had passed, and he was walking out into the clear, quiet air. The weeks that followed were not a time of celebration for Liam. There was no gloating, no sense of petty victory. There was only the quiet, methodical work of rebuilding. Not his own life, that had never truly been broken, only bent, but the wreckage left in the wake of his revelation. His legal team, led by Isabella, descended upon Sterling Holdings with the quiet efficiency of a rising tide. The company was fundamentally restructured. Richard Sterling was allowed to retire, a face-saving gesture that was, in reality, a forced exile. He was given a nominal pension and a gag order, his name scrubbed from the letterhead of the company his grandfather had built. The news reports painted it as a voluntary stepping down due to health reasons and a desire to pursue philanthropy. Liam knew the truth. Richard was a king without a kingdom, rattling around his Greenwich mansion, a ghost in his own life. The Sterling Grand, under the new management of Iridian's development arm, was transformed. The architectural plans were redrawn. The gaudy, gold-leaf lobby was redesigned into a bright, open public atrium. The news that a significant portion of the tower would be dedicated to affordable housing sent shockwaves through the city's real estate community and made Liam an anonymous hero in the press. The mystery buyer of Sterling Holdings was lauded for their progressive vision. Eleanor's world crumbled in a different, but no less complete, way. Her social standing was predicated entirely on her husband's power and wealth. With Richard neutered and the family name now associated with scandal and financial collapse, the invitations stopped coming. The fawning friends disappeared. She was a queen in exile, her currency of status rendered worthless. Liam heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had put the Greenwich estate on the market. It was too large, too expensive, and too full of ghosts. Julian was summarily fired. His VP of Acquisitions title was meaningless in a company that was no longer acquiring anything. His severance was standard, his prospect bleak. His entire career had been a product of nepotism, and with the family name now a liability, he was forced to confront a world that did not care about his pedigree. The last Liam heard, he was trying to launch a consulting firm, but no one was hiring him. And Chloe. She tried to reach him, of course. There are dozens of texts filled with desperate apologies and declarations of undying love. There were tearful voicemails pleading for one more chance. He never responded. He had his assistant block her number. It wasn't out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Their chapter was closed. There was nothing more to say. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 months after the meeting, Liam was walking through the nearly completed Henderson Community Center. The project, his secret passion, was coming to life. The library was filled with natural light. The gymnasium floor was being laid, and the daycare center was being painted in bright, cheerful colors. Mr. Henderson, the elderly community activist who had championed the project for years, walked beside him, his face alight with a joy that was almost beatific. "I never thought I'd live to see this day, Liam," Mr. Henderson said, his voice thick with emotion. He placed a frail, trembling hand on Liam's arm. "You didn't just give us a building. You gave this neighborhood its heart back." Liam looked around at the space, at the tangible good that had come from his work, from the wealth he had so carefully hidden. This was real. This was a foundation that would last. This was the antithesis of the Sterling Grand, a monument not to one man's ego, but to the collective spirit of many. "I just drew the plans, Mr. Henderson," Liam said. "You and the community built it." As they stood there, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. It was an email from an unknown address. The subject line was simply goodbye. He knew who it was from. He opened it. It was from Chloe. It was short, and for the first time, it felt honest. "Liam," it read, "I know you won't reply, and I don't expect you to. I've spent the last 2 months thinking, really thinking, about everything. You were right. About all of it. I didn't love you. I don't think I even knew what love was. I was just playing a part that I thought I was supposed to play. I betrayed you, and I betrayed myself. My father is a broken man. My mother is lost. My brother is angry at the world. We built our house on sand, and you were the storm that washed it away. Maybe we deserved it. I'm moving to California to try and find out who I am without the Sterling name. I don't know if I'll succeed. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not so you'll forgive me, but because I needed to say it. Goodbye." Liam read the email twice. He felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a sense of closure. She was, perhaps, finally starting to understand. Her path would be difficult, but it was her own. He had not destroyed her. He had simply removed the scaffolding of lies that had been holding her up, forcing her, for the first time, to learn how to stand on her own. He deleted the email and put his phone away. The past was the past. He looked forward at the lights streaming through the large windows of the community center, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of profound peace. A year passed. The seasons turned, and the city skyline changed, as it always does. The Sterling Grand, now renamed the Viridian Tower, was completed. It stood as a testament to a new kind of ambition, one that integrated profit with purpose, luxury with accessibility. It became a symbol not of one man's ego, but of a city's potential. The story of its hostile takeover and subsequent transformation became a legend in the financial world, its anonymous architect celebrated as a modern-day folk hero. Liam remained anonymous. He found that his privacy, once a shield, was now a cherished comfort. He continued his work, designing buildings that served people, that respected the environment, that added beauty and function to the world. His life was quiet, ordered, and deeply fulfilling. The anger and betrayal he had felt that night, coming home to the warm wine glasses, had long since faded, replaced by a deep, abiding calm. He had faced the worst of human nature, the arrogance, the greed, the deceit, and he had not allowed it to corrupt him. He had maintained his integrity, his moral high ground, and in doing so, had won a victory that was more than just financial. It was a victory of character. One evening, he was having dinner at a small, quiet restaurant in a neighborhood he'd helped revitalize. He was alone, reading a book, enjoying the simple pleasure of a meal well made. He looked up as the bell over the door chimed, and a woman walked in. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater. Her hair was different, shorter, and she wore no makeup. It took him a moment to recognize her. It was Chloe. She didn't see him. She was meeting someone, another woman, and they sat at a table across the room. Liam watched, unseen, from behind his book. This Chloe was different. There was a quietness about her, a lack of the brittle, performative energy she used to carry. She laughed with her friend, and it was a genuine, easy sound, not the tinkling, social laugh he remembered. She looked content. She looked like she was finally comfortable in her own skin. Their eyes met, just for a second, across the crowded room. A flicker of recognition passed through her gaze, followed by a complex cascade of emotions. Surprise, a hint of old shame, and then something like quiet acceptance. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a plea or a greeting. It was an acknowledgement, a silent message that said, "I'm okay. You're okay. We've moved on." Liam nodded back, a gesture just as small, just as final. He returned to his book, but he wasn't reading. He was reflecting. He had designed their downfall, but the ultimate outcome was not ruin, but reconstruction. Richard, Eleanor, and Julian had been forced to confront the hollowness of their lives. And Chloe, stripped of her name and her inheritance, had been given the one thing her wealth could never buy, a chance to build a genuine self. Poetic justice, he thought, was not always about punishment. Sometimes it was about forcing someone to draw a new set of blueprints for their own life. He paid his bill and left the restaurant, stepping out into the cool night air. He looked up at the Viridian Tower, visible even from here, its peak lit against the dark sky. It was a beautiful building, a strong building. It had a solid foundation. And in the end, that's all that really matters. The story wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about integrity. It was about the quiet, unshakable power of being true to yourself in a world that constantly asks you to be something else. True worth is never about the noise you make or the status you project. It's about the foundations you build, both in the world and within yourself. It's about being the architect of your own character. What do you think? Is true forgiveness about letting someone back into your life? Or is it about letting them go so you can both move on? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, build strong foundations.